The experimental FTL drive made a sound that no engine should ever make, and Captain Elena Vasquez looked up from her coffee with the tired expression of someone who had seen too many things go wrong to be surprised anymore. She was 53 years old and had spent 30 of those years hauling cargo across the solar system in ships that were held together by duct tape and stubborn hope, and this particular ship, called the USS Mundane, was no different from any of the others she had commanded. The bridge was small and cramped and smelled faintly of the instant noodles that engineer Marcus Chun insisted on cooking at all hours of the night. What was that sound? Elena asked without any real urgency in her voice. Marcus poked his head up from behind a console where he had been doing something with wires that probably violated at least 12 safety regulations. That would be the FTL drive doing something unexpected, Captain. Unexpected good or unexpected bad? Unexpected. Weird. Elena sighed and took another sip of her coffee, which had gone cold about an hour ago, but she drank it anyway because wasting coffee was a sin in her book. USS Mundane had been selected for the first test of humanity's experimental faster than light technology, not because it was the best ship or the most advanced ship, but because it was the most expendable ship, and its crew had volunteered mostly because they were promised hazard pay. The crew consisted of 7 people who had all seen better days. There was Elena, the captain, who had a talent for remaining calm in situations that would make other people scream. Marcus Chen, the engineer who could fix anything with enough time and enough profanity. Yuki Tanaka, the ship medic, who had joined because their student loans were astronomical and the hazard pay was good. Darnell Washington, the pilot, who had flown everything from commercial shuttles to mining vessels and claimed he could fly a brick if someone strapped an engine to it. Paulo Silva, the junior technician, who was 22 years old and still young enough to think space travel was exciting. Sarah Mitchell, the communications officer, who had a gift for languages and a talent for sarcasm. And finally, there was Bob from accounting, who nobody quite remembered inviting, but who had somehow ended up on the ship anyway and now handled their inventory. So where are we? Elena asked. Darnell was staring at his navigation screen with an expression that suggested the screen was showing him something impossible. Captain, I have good news and bad news. Give me the bad news first. We are definitely not near Mars. And the good news. The good news is that we are somewhere and not dead in the void of space. Elena walked over to look at the navigation screen, and what she saw made her raise one eyebrow, which was the Elena Vasquez equivalent of screaming in terror. The screen showed stars that should not exist in patterns that no human had ever recorded, and in the distance, there was what appeared to be a massive space station that looked like someone had built a city and then launched it into orbit. Wow, Elena said, this is different. Before anyone could respond, the ship shook as something locked onto them, and Sarah looked up from her communications console with wide eyes. Captain, we are being hailed. By who? By everyone, apparently. The main view screen flickered to life, and Elena found herself looking at a face that was definitely not human. The being on the screen was tall and crystalline, with a body that seemed to be made of living gemstone that shifted colors as it moved, and it wore what was clearly some kind of military uniform covered in medals and insignia. Behind this being, Elena could see a bridge that made the Mundane look like a cardboard box, and through the viewport she could see ships, many ships that were sleek and deadly, and pointed directly at them with weapons that glowed with barely contained energy. Unknown vessel, the crystalline being said in a voice that somehow translated into perfect English. You have entered the sovereign territory of the Valorian hegemony, the greatest empire in the known galaxy, and you will identify yourselves immediately, or be destroyed. Elena looked at the being on the screen, and then looked at her crew, and then looked back at the being on the screen. Does anyone have any idea what a Valorian hegemony is? She asked her crew. Never heard of it, Marcus said. Me neither, Darnell added. Captain, Sarah whispered urgently. I think they want us to respond. Elena turned back to the screen and gave the crystalline being a small wave. Hello there, my name is Elena Vasquez, and I am the captain of the USS Mundane, and I have... To be honest with you, we have absolutely no idea where we are or how we got here. The crystalline being stared at her with what might have been confusion if Elena could read alien facial expressions, which she could not. You do not know where you are. Not a clue. You are in the heart of the Valorian hegemony, which controls 40,000 worlds across 3 galactic arms. That sounds very impressive, Elena said. We are from Earth, which controls 1 world and about half of Mars, if you count the research stations. There was a long pause. You control 1 world. Yes. And you have FTL capability. Apparently we do now, although to be fair, this was supposed to be a test run, and I think something went wrong with the navigation. The crystalline being turned to speak with someone off screen, and Elena took the opportunity to look at her crew. Anyone remember to pack extra coffee? She asked. I have 3 bags in my quarters, Dr. Tanaka said. Good, because I have a feeling we might be here for a while. The crystalline being turned back to face them. I am Supreme Admiral Vex Kai of the Valorian hegemony. First, fleet, and you will power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Elena looked around the bridge. What weapons? She asked genuinely. Confused. Your ship must have weapons. We are a converted cargo hauler. Elena explained, the most dangerous thing on this ship is Marcus when he has not had enough sleep. Hey, Marcus protested, but he did not actually deny it. Supreme Admiral Vex Kai seemed to be experiencing some kind of internal crisis that his training had not prepared him for. You entered sovereign hegemony space in an unarmed vessel. We did not really enter on purpose, Elena said. Like I said, something went wrong with our FDL drive, and here we are. You will be escorted to Valoria Prime, where the Council of Ascendant Minds will determine your fate. All right, Elena said. Is there somewhere we can refuel along the way because our engines are making a sound that I do not like? You are asking about fuel. Yes, you are surrounded by the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, and you are asking about fuel. Elena shrugged. We still need fuel regardless of who is pointing guns at us. There was another long pause, and Elena could have sworn she saw Supreme Admiral Vex Kai twitch. You will follow the escort ships, he said finally, and do not attempt to escape. Escape to where exactly? Elena asked. We do not even know where we are. The communication ended, and the view screen went dark. Elena turned to her crew, who were all staring at her with varying expressions of disbelief and amusement. Wow, she said. This is certainly more interesting than hauling cargo to Mars. Captain, Paula said with the nervous energy of someone young enough to still feel fear. We are surrounded by an alien empire with enough firepower to destroy us 1,000 times over. Yes, we are. Should we not be more worried about that? Elena walked back to her chair and sat down. Picking up her cold coffee, Paolo, I have survived 3 hull breaches, 2 engine explosions, 1 cargo bay fire, and that time we accidentally transported live chickens that escaped from their containers, and we spent a week catching them all. She said, this is just another thing to deal with. But aliens, Captain, actual aliens. They seem organized, and they have rules and bureaucracy. Elena said, that means they have paperwork and meetings, and probably a chain of command that moves slower than a frozen slug, which means we have time to figure this out. The escort ships fell into formation around the Mundane, and they began moving toward whatever fate awaited them. Anyone want to play cards? Darnell asked. It is going to be a long trip. And so the crew of the USS Mundane played poker while being escorted through the heart of the most powerful empire in the galaxy, completely unaware that they had just started something that would change everything. The journey to Valoria Prime took 3 standard days, and during that time, Supreme Admiral Vex Kai experienced something he had never felt before in his 800 years of military service. He Was confused, the admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the tiny human vessel on his view screen with growing frustration. In his centuries of service, he had overseen the conquest of 73 worlds and the subjugation of 15 species, and every single one of them had reacted to Valorian military might in predictable ways. Some fought back desperately and were crushed. Some surrendered immediately and were absorbed into the hegemony as servant races. Some tried to negotiate from positions of weakness and were given terms they could not refuse. But none of them had ever asked about fuel. None of them had ever waved at him, and none of them had ever responded to being surrounded by a war fleet by playing card games. Admiral, his second in command, said, "We have completed our scans of the alien vessel. Report. The ship appears to be exactly what they claimed. It is a cargo vessel with no weapons and minimal defensive capabilities." "That is impossible. The scans are accurate, Admiral. No species develops faster than light travel without also developing weapons." These ones apparently did. Vex Kai turned to stare at the small, ugly ship that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and determination. "What about their crew?" 7 individuals, all appearing to be of the same species, and our biological scans indicate they are carbon-based life forms with relatively fragile physical structures. Fragile. They require oxygen to breathe. Their bodies cannot survive in vacuum. They appear to be vulnerable to extreme temperatures, and their average lifespan based on cellular analysis is approximately 80 to 100 of their planetary years. They live less than 100 years. "Yes, Admiral." Vex Kai felt his crystalline form shift colors in a way that indicated deep thought among his kind. The Valorian people lived for thousands of years, and their crystalline bodies were nearly indestructible, and they had spent millennia building an empire because they had the time to do so. These humans lived for less than a century, and yet they had developed FTL technology. It did not make sense. "Open a channel to their ship," he commanded. The view screen flickered, and he found himself looking at the human captain again, who appeared to be in the middle of eating something. "Oh, hello, Admiral," Elena said, while chewing. "Sorry, we were having lunch. Want some?" "I do not require your food. You're lost. These are pretty good noodles. I have questions about your species." "Ask away." Vex Kai paused, trying to formulate his thoughts in a way that would not reveal how deeply unsettled he was. "How long has your species had space travel?" "About 70 years, give or take." 70 years. "Yes, we landed on our moon in 1969, which was about that long ago." "And how long have you had faster than light capability?" "Technically, this is our first successful test, so about 3 days." "Your first test?" "Well, first successful test anyway. There were some earlier attempts that did not go so well, but we do not talk about those." Vex Kai felt something that might have been a headache if Valorians could get headaches. "You traveled across the galaxy on your first test of an experimental drive." "Apparently, yes. That is incredibly reckless. That is kind of our thing, honestly." Behind the captain, Vex Kai could see the rest of the human crew going about their business, as if being escorted by an alien war fleet was a normal, everyday occurrence. One of them was cooking something that produced steam. Another was reading what appeared to be a paper book. A third was doing exercises on the floor of the bridge. "Do your crew not understand the gravity of their situation?" Vex Kai asked. "Oh, they understand. They do not act like it." "Admiral," Elena said, putting down her food, "we come from a planet where we almost destroyed ourselves about a dozen times, and we kept going, and we survived ice ages and plagues and wars, and that one time, a really big rock almost hit us, and we figured out how to stop it." "What is your point?" "My point is that we have been scared before, and being scared does not actually help, so we stopped letting it control us." Vex Kai did not know how to respond to that. "We will arrive at Valoria Prime within 12 hours, he said finally. "You will be brought before the Council of Ascendant Minds." and they will determine what to do with you. Sounds good, Elena said. Is there anything we should know about this council? They are the supreme rulers of the hegemony, and their word is absolute law. But are they morning people or evening people? Because I am not great at mornings. That is not relevant. It might be relevant to me. Vex Kai ended the communication because he did not know what else to do. He turned to his second-in-command, who was watching him with what might have been concern. These humans are either the most brilliant strategists in the galaxy, or they are completely insane. Perhaps both, Admiral. Prepare my report for the Council, and include everything we have observed. Everything, Admiral. Everything. 12 hours later, the fleet arrived at Valoria. Prime and Vex Kai had to admit that he felt a small amount of satisfaction at the reaction from the human crew when they saw. The planet Valoria Prime was a world of crystal and light where towering spires reached toward the sky, and cities floated on platforms of pure energy, and the entire surface glittered like a jewel in the light of the system. Twin suns. Oh wow. The young human called Paolo said, "That is actually really pretty." Not terrified, not awed, just pretty, like he was commenting on a nice sunset. Mundane was guided to a landing platform near the central palace, and as the ship touched down, it was immediately surrounded by Valorian guards in ceremonial armor. Vex Kai watched from his ship as the humans emerged from their vessel, and he had to resist the urge to put his face in his hands. Captain was carrying a cup of some brown liquid. The engineer was still wearing grease-stained clothing. The medic was taking pictures with a small device, and one of them, the one called Bob, was carrying a clipboard and appeared to be taking notes. "Are those weapons?" one of his officers asked, pointing at the devices. The humans carried. "No," Vex Kai said. "Those are beverages and documentation. Should we confiscate them? I honestly do not know anymore." The humans were escorted into the palace, and Vex Kai followed at a distance, watching as they looked around it. The grandeur of Valorian architecture with the casual interest of tourists. "Nice place," the pilot said. "Very shiny. Reminds me of that casino in Vegas," the engineer added. "What is a Vegas?" a guard asked. "It is a city on our planet where people go to make poor decisions and lose money." The guard did not know how to respond to that. They were led through corridors of crystal and light, past statues of great Valorian leaders, past displays of conquered worlds, past trophies taken from defeated enemies. The humans looked at all of it with polite interest and nothing more. Finally, they arrived at the great hall where the Council of Ascendant Minds awaited them. The council consisted of 12 of the oldest and most powerful Valorians in existence, beings who had lived for 10,000 years or more, and who had guided the hegemony through ages of expansion and conquest. They sat on thrones of living crystal that amplified their presence and made them seem larger than life, and behind them, holographic displays showed the full extent of the hegemony's territory: 40,000 worlds, 3 galactic arms, trillions of subjects. The humans walked in and stopped at the designated spot for supplicants, which was marked by a glowing circle on the floor. Captain Elena Vasquez looked at the council and then looked at her crew and then looked back at the council. "Hello there," she said. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the USS Mundane from Earth, and I was told you wanted to talk to us." The lead council member, an ancient being named Grand Ascendant Vel, who had personally overseen the destruction of entire civilizations, looked down at the small, fragile human who stood before them without trembling. "You stand in the presence of the Council of Ascendant Minds," Vel said, "rulers of the greatest empire in the known galaxy." "Yes, very impressive," Elena said. "Nice chairs, by the way. You will show proper respect." "I am being respectful. This is how we talk where I come from." And in that moment, Grand Ascendant Vel realized that these humans were going to be a problem, not because they were powerful or dangerous, but because they simply did not understand that they were supposed to be afraid. And that was far more troubling than any weapon. could ever be. Grand Ascendant Vel had ruled the Council of Ascendant Minds for 3,000 years, and in that time he had never encountered a diplomatic situation quite like this one. The humans stood before him in their strange soft clothing with their fragile bodies and their complete lack of ceremonial protocol, and they seemed entirely unbothered by the fact that they were standing in the most powerful room in the galaxy. "We require information about your species and your civilization," Vel said in a voice that had made emperors kneel and warriors weep. "Sure thing," the human captain said. "What do you want to know?" "First, we must know the extent of your military capabilities." Elena turned to her crew. "Does anyone remember what our military budget was last year?" "I think it was around $700 billion, Marcus said, "but do not quote me on that." "Dollars," Vel asked. "What is a dollar?" "It is our money," Elena explained. "Little pieces of paper and metal that we trade for goods and services. You use physical currency. Some of us do, yes. That is incredibly primitive. It works well enough." Vel decided to move on because this line of questioning was not going anywhere useful. "What are the borders of your empire?" "We do not really have an empire," Elena said. "We just have Earth and a few space stations and some research bases on Mars and the Moon. One planet. And how many species have you conquered?" Zero. Well, I mean, we did some bad stuff to each other over the years, but we have never conquered anyone from space, because until about 3 days ago, we did not know anyone from space existed. Vel leaned forward on his throne. "You expect us to believe that you developed faster than light travel without ever encountering another species. I expect you to believe whatever you want," Elena said. "But yes, that is the truth. That is statistically improbable. Life is statistically improbable, and yet here we all are." One of the other council members spoke up. "Do you have any proof of your claims about your homeworld?" Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I have this. It is a tourist brochure from the Kennedy Space Center, which is where we launch a lot of our rockets." A guard stepped forward to take the brochure and brought it to the council, who examined it with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. The brochure showed pictures of rockets and astronauts and the blue-green sphere of Earth hanging in the blackness of space. "This is your planet?" Val asked. "That is Earth, yes. It is very blue. We have a lot of water, and these are your spacecraft. Those are some of our older ones, but yes, they appear to be propelled by controlled explosions. That is exactly what they are. That is an incredibly dangerous method of space travel." Elena shrugged. "It got us to the moon and back, so we cannot complain too much." Vel handed the brochure back to the guard and tried to process what he was seeing: a species that lived for less than a century, a species that had only one planet as species, that traveled by strapping themselves to controlled explosions, and they had somehow stumbled into the heart of the hegemony and were treating it like a minor inconvenience. "Where did you say Earth was located?" he asked Elena, looked at the brochure, and then looked at the star maps displayed behind the council. "Honestly, I have no idea," she admitted. "Our navigation got messed up when the FDL drive malfunctioned, so I cannot even tell you which direction home is. You do not know how to return to your homeworld." "Not at the moment, no. And this does not concern you." "It concerns me a little bit," Elena said. "But getting concerned will not magically fix our navigation, so there is no point in panicking about it." Vel turned to his fellow council members, and they engaged in a rapid telepathic conversation that the humans could not hear. The conversation went something like this: "These humans are either playing a very sophisticated game, or they are genuinely this calm about everything. Perhaps they are too stupid to understand their situation. They developed FTL in 70 years. They are not stupid. Then what are they unknown? What should we do with them? Unknown this is most frustrating." Agreed. The telepathic conference ended, and Vel turned back to face the humans. We will need time to verify your claims and determine the appropriate course of action. Take all the time you need, Elena said. Is there somewhere? We can wait because I would really like a cup of tea. Tea. It is a hot beverage made from leaves, and it is very calming. You want a beverage. If it is not too much trouble, yes. Vel gestured to one of the guards. Take them to the diplomatic quarters and see that they are provided with whatever they need within reason. Thank you, Elena said. Oh, one more question. What? Do you have anywhere? I can do laundry because we have been traveling for 3 days and I am running out of clean clothes. Vel stared at her for a long moment. You are being held by the most powerful empire in the galaxy, and you are asking about laundry. Dirty clothes do not stop being dirty just because aliens are pointing guns at us. Take them away, Vel said. Now. The humans were escorted out of the Great Hall, and as soon as the doors closed behind them, Vel slumped on his throne in a way that was very undignified for a grand ascendant. What in the name of the first crystals was that? One of the other council members asked. I do not know. Vel admitted. They showed no fear at all. I noticed. How is that possible? I do not know. What should we do? I do not know. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Council of Ascendant Minds had no idea what to do. They had protocols for war. They had protocols for surrender. They had protocols for negotiation and conquest and subjugation. But they had no protocol for humans. Meanwhile, in the diplomatic quarters, Elena Vasquez was shown to a suite of rooms that were larger than her entire ship and decorated with crystals and precious metals and artwork from 100 conquered worlds. This is nice, she said. The guard who had escorted her looked at her with something like disbelief. These quarters were designed to humble visiting dignitaries with the wealth and power of the hegemony. While they are very sparkly, I will give you that. You are not humbled. I have seen sparkly things before. These are not just sparkly things, these are treasures. Beyond price. My grandmother had a crystal vase that was pretty fancy. Elena said, this reminds me of her living room a little bit. The guard opened his mouth to respond and then closed it again because he had no idea what to say. Anyway, about that tea, Elena continued, and maybe a sandwich if you have something similar to bread and whatever you put between bread. The guard left to fulfill her request, and Elena sat down on what appeared to be a couch made of solidified light. Marcus walked in a few minutes later. The rooms are bugged, he said casually. Listening devices everywhere. Of course they are. Should we do something about that? Why bother, Elena said. We have nothing to hide and maybe they will learn something about us that helps them understand we are not a threat. You know, Captain, for someone who accidentally flew us into an alien empire, you are handling this pretty well. Marcus I once had to negotiate a cargo dispute with a Martian mining consortium while our ship was on fire and we were running out of oxygen and the cargo was live chickens. I remember that. Compared to that, this is almost relaxing. There was a knock at the door, and a servant entered carrying a tray with something that looked approximately like tea and something that looked approximately like a sandwich. Your refreshments, the servant said. The council hopes they are acceptable. Elena took a sip of the tea. Not bad, she said. Could use some honey, but not bad. The servant left and Elena settled back with her tea while somewhere in the palace, the most powerful beings in the galaxy were having a crisis meeting about what to do with the strange calm humans who had wandered into their empire. And Elena thought about her grandmother, crystal vase, and wondered what the old woman would have thought about all this. Probably would have asked if they had any good recipes, she decided. Some things were universal after all. 3 days passed while the Council of Ascendant Minds debated what to do with their unexpected guests, and in that time, the humans did what humans always do when left to their own devices. They made friends. It started with Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who had wandered into the palace gardens looking for somewhere quiet to read. her medical journals and had instead found a group of Valorian palace guards taking a break from their duties. "Hello," she said, because Yuki had never met a stranger she could not talk to. The guards stared at her with expressions that mixed suspicion with curiosity. "You are one of the humans," the largest guard said. "I am. Yes, my name is Yuki. I am tall crystalline of the fourth formation, and we were told not to interact with you." "Oh," Yuki said. "Well, I can leave if you want." She started to turn away, but another guard spoke up. "Wait, what is that in your hands?" Yuki held up her deck of cards, which she always carried for boring nights on the ship. "These are playing cards. We use them for games." "Games?" "Yes, do you not have games?" The guards looked at each other. "We have strategic simulations and combat training exercises." "No, I mean games for fun, things you do to pass the time and enjoy yourselves." The concept seemed to confuse them. "Our purpose is to serve the hegemony," Tal said. "We do not have time for enjoyment." Yuki sat down on a nearby bench. "That sounds exhausting." "It is our honor and duty." "Sure, but everyone needs a break sometimes, right?" The guards did not respond, but they also did not leave, and Yuki took that as an invitation. "Here, let me show you something." She began dealing out cards and explained the rules of poker in simple terms, and within an hour the guards were gathered around her, completely absorbed in the game. "I do not understand. I have 2 pairs of these numbered cards. Why does your 3 matching cards defeat mine?" "Because 3 of a kind beats 2 pair. But I have 4 cards and you only have 3. It is not about quantity, it is about the combination. This game makes no logical sense." That is kind of the point. Meanwhile, in the palace kitchens, Darnell Washington was having a different kind of cultural exchange. He had wandered in looking for snacks and had found a team of Valorian chefs preparing food for the evening meal. "That smells interesting," he said. "What is it?" The head chef, a stout Valorian with crystals that had turned yellow with age, looked at him suspiciously. "This is the traditional ceremonial feast of the hegemony, prepared according to recipes that are 10,000 years old. Cool, but what does it taste like?" "Taste is secondary to tradition." Darnell raised an eyebrow. "So it does not taste good. It tastes like it has always tasted. That is not the same thing." The chef seemed offended, but also intrigued. "And I suppose human food tastes better." "Some of it does, yeah. We have this thing called barbecue that would change your life." "Barbecue?" "It is when you cook meat slowly over low heat with smoke and spices until it falls apart in your mouth." The chef looked skeptical, but Darnell could see a spark of curiosity in his crystalline eyes. "Tell me more about this barbecue." And so Darnell spent the next several hours explaining the art of slow cooking and smoking meat, and by the end of it, the chef was taking notes and asking questions about wood types and rub recipes. But perhaps the most significant cultural contamination came from Paulo Silva, the youngest member of the crew, who had found his way to a common area where young Valorians gathered during their leisure hours. "What is that device?" a young Valorian asked, pointing at Paulo's phone. "This is a phone," Paulo said. "We use it for communication and entertainment." "What kind of entertainment?" Paulo thought for a moment, and then pulled up his collection of memes. "These are called memes. They are images with text that are supposed to be funny." The young Valorians gathered around to look, and Paulo showed them a picture of a cat with the caption, "When you have to go to work but you want to stay in bed." "I do not understand," one of them said. "See, the cat looks tired and grumpy because it does not want to do its responsibilities." And that is relatable, because everyone feels that way sometimes. We are taught that duty comes before personal comfort. Sure, but do you not ever feel tired or wish you could just have a lazy day? The young Valorians looked at each other and then back at Paulo. That would be considered weakness. No, it is just being alive. Everyone needs rest, and it is okay to admit that. Paulo showed them more memes, and slowly he saw something change in their expressions. They started to smile, some of them. Even laughed. "This one," a young Valorian said, pointing at an image. "This is exactly how I feel when my instructor gives me extra training." Right, because it is unexpected and annoying. Yes, exactly. Within hours, the memes had spread beyond the common. Young Valorians were sharing them through their communication networks and adding their own text to images and making jokes about their daily lives. It was small, but it was something that had never happened before in the rigidly controlled culture of the hegemony. Meanwhile, Supreme Admiral Vex Kai was receiving reports about the humans' activities, and each report made his crystalline form shift through increasingly confused colors. The human doctor is teaching our guards to gamble. The human pilot is teaching our chefs to cook meat in new ways. The human technician is spreading some kind of visual communication among our youth. And the human captain? Vex Kai asked. She has been sitting in the garden drinking tea and reading what appears to be a paper book. That is all. She also had a conversation with one of our cleaning staff about the best methods for removing stains from fabric. Vex Kai put his head in his hands, which was a very human gesture that he had somehow picked up in the last few days. These humans are contaminating our culture. Should we confine them to their quarters, Admiral? I considered that, but the Council wants to observe them and learn about their species. Then what should we do? I do not know, but I am starting to think that these humans are more dangerous than any weapon we have ever faced. Because of their technology. No, because they are making our people question things. And that was the heart of it. The Valorian hegemony was built on order and hierarchy and unquestioning obedience, and for 10,000 years it had maintained control through fear and tradition. But the humans did not fear, and they did not follow tradition. They just existed and talked to people and shared their strange ideas, and somehow that was more threatening than any invasion in the palace kitchens. The head chef was experimenting with something he called a smoky flavor infusion, and he was smiling for the first time in centuries in the guards' quarters. Tal and his fellow guards were playing another round of poker and arguing about whether a flush beat a straight in the common rooms. Young Valorians were creating their own memes and laughing at jokes about their own society, and Captain Elena Vasquez sat in the garden drinking tea, completely unaware that she and her crew were slowly changing everything. "Nice sunset," she said to no one in particular. It was not a sunset, it was the light from the planet twin suns reflecting off orbital stations, but Elena thought it was pretty, and somewhere deep in the palace, Grand Ascendant Vel received a report about the cultural changes beginning to spread through the capital, and for the first time in 3,000 years, he felt something that might have been furnet of invasion or conquest, but of something far more dangerous, an idea. The idea that maybe things did not have to be the way they had always been. The Intelligence Directorate of the Valorian hegemony was the most feared organization in the known galaxy. For 10,000 years, they had gathered secrets and crushed dissent, and broken the minds of those who opposed the hegemony, and their methods were legendary. They had psychics who could read thoughts. They had drugs that could force truth from any being. They had technology that could extract memories directly from neural tissue. No species had ever resisted them. No secret had ever remained hidden until now. Agent Vex then was the Directorate Best Interrogator, and he had been personally assigned to analyze the humans and determine if they were a threat. He was confident it would be simple. It was not simple. His first attempt involved a psychic probe during which he tried to read the mind of the human engineer Marcus Chun. What he found was chaos. The human mind was a storm of disconnected thoughts and random memories and half-finished ideas that bounced around without any logical organization. Vex then searched for military secrets and found a mental image of something called a cheeseburger. Searched for political intelligence and found a fragment of a song that repeated endlessly. He searched for strategic information and found Marcus trying to remember if he had turned off the coffee maker before leaving Earth. What did you find? His supervisor asked. I do not know how to describe it. Was there useful intelligence? I found extensive knowledge about something called fantasy football, which appears to be a complex strategic simulation involving human athletes. Is it a military training program? No, I believe it is a recreational activity. They train their strategic thinking through recreation. Maybe I honestly cannot tell. His second attempt was more direct. Vex then brought Captain Elena Vasquez to an interrogation room and sat across from her at a metal table. Captain Vasquez, he said, I am going to ask you some questions, and I expect truthful answers. Sure thing, Elena said. Do you have any of that tea I had earlier, because this room is kind of cold? This is not a social visit. I know, but cold rooms make me less cooperative, not more. Vex then gestured to an assistant who left to fetch tea because he was not sure how else to respond while we wait. Elena said, Can I ask what this room is usually used for? Interrogation. Right, but like what kind? Because some interrogation methods are more effective than others. You have experience with interrogation. I watched a lot of crime shows back home. Crime shows. They are entertainment programs about people who solve crimes, and sometimes they show interrogations. Your species creates entertainment about criminal investigation. We create entertainment about everything, honestly. The tea arrived, and Elena took a sip and nodded approvingly. Okay, I am ready for your questions. Vex then leaned forward. What are the military capabilities of your homeworld? We have armies and navies and air forces and some space defense stuff. Be more specific. I do not really know the specific numbers. I am a cargo ship captain, not a military officer. You must know something. I know we have nuclear weapons, which are really powerful bombs, and I know we have a lot of soldiers, but I cannot give you exact figures. Nuclear weapons. Yes, they split atoms and release a lot of energy. You have weapons that split atoms. We have had those for about 80 years. Vex then felt his crystalline form flicker with surprise. And you have not destroyed yourselves. We almost did a few times, but we worked it out. How? Honestly, I think we just got lucky. And also there were some very tired people who decided not to push buttons at critical moments. Your species survived nuclear capability through luck and exhaustion. Pretty much, yeah. Vex then sat back in his chair. This was not going the way he had planned. Tell me about your government. We do not have one unified government. We have about 200 different countries all doing their own thing. That is chaos. It is a little chaotic, yes. How do you function as a species? We argue a lot and have meetings, and sometimes we agree on things, and sometimes we do not. That is not a functional system. And yet here we are talking to you in a galactic empire, so something must be working. Vex then tried a different approach. What are your intentions toward the hegemony? We do not really have intentions, we just want to fix our ship and go home. You have no desire for conquest or expansion. We can barely agree on what to have for dinner, let alone launch a galactic invasion. That seems like a weakness. It is definitely inconvenient sometimes. Are you not concerned that the hegemony might conquer your world? Elena took another sip of her tea. Look, if you wanted to conquer Earth, you probably could, she said. You have more ships and better technology, and you have been doing this a lot longer than us. This does not frighten you. Being frightened would not stop you, would it? No. Then what is the point of being frightened? Vex then stared at her for a long moment. You truly are not afraid. I did not say that, Elena said. I am a little nervous because this is all very new and strange. And I miss my cat back home, and I worry about what my kids are going to think when they find out their mom got lost in space. You have children. 2 daughters, both grown now. Elena pulled out her phone and showed him a picture. That is Rosa. She is a teacher, and that is Maria. She is an engineer like Marcus. Vex then looked at the image of two smiling human women standing in front of what appeared to be a body of water. They look like you. Everyone says Maria has my nose. What is a nose? This thing. Elena pointed at her face for breathing and smelling. Ah, yes, we have something similar, though ours is internal. They sat in silence for a moment. Can I ask you a question? Elena said. I suppose. Do you have family? Valorians do not have families in the way you describe. We are grown from crystal seeds in formation chambers. That sounds lonely. We have our formation mates, those who grew alongside us. So, like brothers and sisters, but different. Perhaps, do you miss them when you are away? Vexton was quiet for a long time. Sometimes, he admitted. Though it is not something we discuss. Why not? It would be considered a weakness. Missing people you care about is not weakness. It is just being alive. Vex then ended the interrogation. Shortly after that, his report to the directorate was classified at the highest level, and it concluded with a statement that will be discussed for years to come either. These beings are playing a game so sophisticated we cannot comprehend it, or they genuinely do not understand they should be afraid, and both possibilities are terrifying. The third possibility, that the humans were exactly what they appeared to be, which was ordinary people in an extraordinary situation, was not considered because that would mean that fear was optional. And if fear was optional, then the entire foundation of the hegemony power was built on something that did not have to exist. Agent Vex then did not sleep well that night. He kept thinking about the picture of Elena daughters and the way she had smiled when she showed it to him. He kept thinking about his formation mates and how long it had been since he had seen them, and for the first time in his 800 years of service, he wondered if maybe things could be different. It was a small thought barely formed, but it was there, and small thoughts have a way of growing. The Valorian hegemony controlled 40,000 worlds, and on those worlds lived hundreds of species who had been conquered and absorbed over 10,000 years of expansion. Some had been warriors who fought until they could fight no more. Some had been scholars whose knowledge was deemed useful enough to preserve. Some had been simple farmers and workers who became the labor force that kept the empire running. All of them had one thing in common: they were afraid. Fear was the glue that held the hegemony together, and it had worked perfectly for millennia, and nobody questioned it because questioning meant death, until the humans arrived on a mining world called Kethver, which orbited a dying star. A group of workers gathered in secret to discuss the strangest news they had ever heard. You are certain this is true? Asked Vrek, who was old by his species standards and had worked the mines since he was a child. I heard it from a trader, who heard it from a Valorian, who heard it from someone who works in the palace, said Myra, who was young and still had hope in her eyes. They say these humans walked into the council chamber and spoke to the Grand Ascendant like he was just another person. Impossible. They say the humans do. Not Bo. Everyone bows. Not the humans. Then they must have been killed. They are still alive, and they are still not bowing. The workers looked at each other in the dim light of their underground meeting place, and none of them quite knew what to say. For their entire lives, they had been taught that the Valorians were invincible, and that resistance was futile, and that the best they could hope for was survival through obedience. But now there were beings who did not obey beings who did not bow, beings who apparently asked about laundry while surrounded by weapons. What are these humans like? Rek asked. They are small and soft, Mira said. Smaller than us even, and they only live for about 100 years. And they do not fear the Valorians. They do not seem to fear anything. How is that possible? I do not know, but if they can do it, maybe we can too. It was a dangerous thought, and Vrek immediately looked around to make sure no one had heard. Do not speak such things. Why not? Because speaking such things gets people killed. People are already being killed, Myra said. Every day in the mines we lose workers to accidents and exhaustion, and nobody cares because we are replaceable. That is how it has always been. But what if it does not have to be? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. What if it does not have to be on 100 other worlds? Similar conversations were happening as word spread about the strange humans who treated the hegemony like it was no big deal on. Agricultural planets workers whispered about beings who asked for tea instead of begging for mercy on factory worlds. Laborers shared stories about humans who made jokes while surrounded by guards on prison worlds. Inmates told tales of a species that played card games while their fate was being decided, and everywhere the same question was being asked. What if we do not have to be afraid? Meanwhile, on Valoria Prime, the humans remained blissfully unaware of the ripples they were creating. Captain Elena Vasquez had developed a routine. She woke up early and had tea in the garden. She took a walk around the parts of the palace she was allowed to access. She had lunch with whoever was willing to sit with her. She spent the afternoon reading or talking to the staff, and in the evening, she gathered with her crew to share stories about their day. I taught the head chef how to make cornbread today, Donnell said, or at least a version of it made with whatever grains they have here. One of the guards asked me to explain the offside rule in soccer. Dr. Tanaka said. I do not think he understood, but he seemed interested. I showed some of the young ones how to make paper airplanes, Paulo said. They were fascinated by how something so simple could fly. Bob updated our inventory spreadsheet. Marcus said. He's very dedicated to accurate record keeping. Bob, who was sitting in the corner, nodded without looking up from his clipboard. What about you, Captain? Darnell asked. What did you do today? I had a very nice conversation with one of the cleaning staff about her grandchildren, Elena said. She has 14 of them, if you can believe it. 14 grandchildren. Valorians live a long time. Apparently they accumulate family. Did you learn anything useful? I learned that her youngest grandchild wants to be an artist, but his parents want him to join the military, and she does not know how to tell him to follow his dreams without getting in trouble. The crew was quiet for a moment. That sounds like something that could happen on Earth, Dr. Tanaka said. People are people, I think, Elena said. Even when they are made of crystal and live for thousands of years, they still worry about their families and want good things for the people they love. That is surprisingly optimistic for someone being held prisoner by an alien empire. Are we really prisoners, though? Because nobody has stopped me from going anywhere except a few restricted areas. We cannot leave. We cannot leave because our ship is broken, not because they are holding us. Is there a difference? I think there might be. In the Palace Command Center, Supreme Admiral Vex Kai was receiving reports that made his crystalline form flicker with concern. The humans continue to interact with staff and guards. I am aware. Their influence appears to be spreading beyond the palace. What do you mean? We are receiving reports from across the Empire about people discussing the humans. Discussing them how? Discussing their behavior, their lack of fear, their casual approach to authority. And this concerns you. Admiral, on 7 different worlds, we have detected increases in what might be called seditious conversation. Seditious. People asking questions they should not be asking. Vex Kai turned to look out the window at the gleaming cityscape of Valoria Prime. What kind of questions? Questions about whether the old ways are the only ways. And you believe the humans are responsible. I believe the humans are a catalyst. They have done nothing but drink tea and tell stories. Sometimes that is enough. Vex Kai considered this. The Council wants to keep them here until we understand their technology and their intentions. And if keeping them here destabilizes the Empire, then we have a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that cannot be solved with weapons. Because that was the truth of it. Hegemony had built itself on fear, and the humans were not afraid, and their lack of fear was contagious. You cannot shoot an idea. You cannot imprison a question, and once people start asking whether things have to be the way they are, it is very hard to make them stop. And Her quarters that night, Elena Vasquez looked out at the alien stars and thought about home. She missed her daughters and their cat and her small apartment with the leaky faucet. She had never gotten around to fixing, but she also felt something else. She felt like maybe they were exactly where they needed to be, not because she had planned it, but because sometimes the universe puts people in places where they can make a difference just by being themselves. "I hope you are okay," she whispered to no one in particular, but somehow she felt like someone was listening and on 100 worlds. Beings who had been afraid their entire lives were starting to wonder if maybe they did not have to bait. Was not a revolution. Not yet, but it was a spark, and sparks have a way of becoming fires. It happened at a formal dinner that Grand Ascendant Vel had organized to observe the humans in a social setting. The great dining hall of the palace was filled with the most powerful Valorians in the Empire, and the humans had been brought in as a curiosity, something to be studied and discussed like exotic animals. In Azulena had been given a dress made of woven crystal fibers, which she admitted was very pretty, even if it was a bit heavy. Her crew had been given similar formal attire, and they all looked deeply uncomfortable, except for Bob, who had somehow found a clipboard that matched his outfit. "Remember to be polite," Elena told her crew, "and do not start any wars." "Captain, when have we ever started a war? There is a first time for everything." The dinner began with the usual formalities, and Valorians asked the usual questions about human society and culture and technology. But then High Minister Rex, one of the more aggressive members of the council, decided to test the humans. "I find it curious," he said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "that your species shows no fear of us." Elena, who had been enjoying something that tasted vaguely like chicken, looked up from her plate. "I would not say we show no fear," she said. "We're just not very good at showing it the way you expect." "Then, you admit you are afraid." "I admit that being surrounded by beings who could destroy us at any moment is not exactly comfortable. And yet you act as if nothing is wrong. What would you have us do?" "Most species would beg for mercy or try to bargain for their survival." Elena set down her eating utensil, which looked like a tiny pitchfork. "Minister Vrex, what exactly would begging accomplish?" "It would demonstrate proper respect for our power." "And then what?" "What do you mean?" "I mean after we beg and demonstrate proper respect, what happens then? Because from what I understand of your empire, begging does not actually improve outcomes for conquered peoples." There was a murmur around the table. "You speak boldly for someone in your position." "I speak honestly, which is different. Perhaps you are simply too primitive to understand your situation." Elena smiled, and it was not a happy smile. "Minister, let me tell you about my situation." She stood up and the guards around the room tensed, but she made no threatening moves. "I come from a species that has been around for about 300,000 years, she said, "and in that time we have nearly destroyed ourselves more times than I can count. This is not impressive. Let me finish." The room went quiet. "We have had ice ages that covered our world in frost, and we survived by huddling in caves and sharing warmth. We have had plagues that killed half our population, and we survived by caring for the sick and burying the dead. We have had wars that made your conquests look like minor disagreements, and we survived by eventually deciding that maybe we should stop killing each other. We have had famines and floods and fires and earthquakes, and every single time we thought, this is it. This is the end. We found a way to keep going." She looked around the room at the crystalline faces. Watching her, we invented weapons that could destroy our entire planet, and instead of using them, we sat down and talked until we found ways to not use them. We poisoned our own air and water, and when we realized what we had done, we started trying to fix it. We are not brave, Minister Vrex. We are not fearless. We are not warriors. We are just tired. We are tired of being afraid, and we are tired of letting fear control us, and we are tired of pretending that the universe owes us anything." She sat back down and picked up her eating utensil again. You want to know why we do not cower before you, because cowering has never saved anyone, and at some point, you just have to decide to face whatever comes with your eyes open and your back straight. It is not courage, it is just exhaustion. The room was completely silent. High Minister Rex looked like he had been slapped Grand Ascendant. Val was staring at Elena with an expression that might have been respect or might have been fear, and somewhere in the palace, a servant who had been recording the dinner for the archives realized that he was witnessing something historic. You are saying, Vel said slowly, that your species has simply stopped caring about survival. No, I am saying that we have stopped letting the fear of death prevent us from living. There is a difference. The difference is that we still want to live, we still fight to survive, we still hope for the future. But we refuse to let that hope be taken from us by fear. Even if that fear is justified, even if the threats are real, even if the odds are against us. Because hope is the one thing that cannot be conquered. The dinner continued, but the mood had changed. The Lorians no longer looked at the humans as curiosities to be studied. They looked at them as something else entirely, something they had never encountered before, a species that had been broken so many times that breaking them again was almost pointless. A species that had faced extinction and kept going anyway. Species that had decided that fear was not worth the effort. And in the days that followed, the recording of Elena's speech spread across the hegemony. It was shared in secret, at first passed from person to person through underground networks that had existed for centuries, but had never had anything worth sharing. Then it spread faster as people realized that others were watching it too. On Mining Worlds, workers played the recording in their dormitories. On Factory Worlds, laborers during their brief breaks. On Agricultural Worlds, farmers gathered to watch it under alien stars. And everywhere the same reaction. If these small, soft, short-lived creatures can face the hegemony without fear, then why do we bow? Why do we cower? Why do we accept that this is how things must be? Was not a call to arms. Elena had not told anyone to fight. She had simply demonstrated that fighting was not the only form of resistance. Sometimes resistance was just refusing to be afraid. Sometimes it was standing up straight and speaking honestly. Sometimes it was drinking tea while surrounded by enemies. And sometimes that was more powerful than any weapon within. Weeks protests began appearing on worlds that had been quiet for millennia. Not violent protests, but quiet ones. Workers who stopped bowing to their overseer, citizens who asked questions they had never dared to ask before. Young people who made jokes about authority figures and shared them through networks that the directorate could not fully control. The hegemony had faced rebellions before and crushed them, but this was different. This was not a rebellion, this was an awakening. And you cannot crush an awakening with weapons. You can only watch as the old certainties crumble and wonder what will grow in their place. 6 weeks after their accidental arrival, the crew of the USS Mundane was summoned to the council chamber for what they were told would be a final meeting. Elena straightened her borrowed clothes and looked at her crew. Whatever happens in there, I want you all to know that it has been an honor serving with you. Captain, that sounds like a goodbye speech. It is not a goodbye speech. It is a just-in-case speech. Just in case of what? Just in case they decide to execute us for accidentally destabilizing their empire. Did we do that? Apparently, yes. The council chamber was different from the first time they had seen it. There were fewer guards, and the council members sat in a less formal arrangement. Grand Ascendant Vel was still in his central throne, but he looked older somehow, as if the last few weeks had aged him more than centuries of rule. Captain Vasquez, he said, please approach. Elena walked forward until she stood at the same spot where she had first addressed the council what felt like a lifetime ago. I will be direct, Vel said. Your presence here has caused significant disruption to our society. I apologize for that. It was not intentional. I know. There was a pause. We have debated extensively about what to do with you and your crew. Vel continued. Some argued for imprisonment, some argued for execution. Some argued for using you as examples to discourage further disruption. Elena did not flinch. And what did you decide? We decided to let you go. Home. The words hung in the air, and Elena was not sure she had heard correctly. You are letting us go. We are helping you go. Vel said, our engineers have examined your ship and your FTL drive, and they believe they can repair the navigation error and send you back to your homeworld. Why? Vel leaned back in his throne. Because keeping you here would only make things worse. I do not understand. Captain, your species has a quality that we did not anticipate and that we cannot counter with force. What? Quality is that you are contagious. Elena blinked. Contagious. Not in the biological sense, but in the ideological sense, and your way of thinking, your refusal to be afraid. Your insistence on treating everyone as equals, your strange habit of making friends with guards and chefs and cleaning staff, it spreads. We were just being ourselves. That is exactly the problem. Vel gestured, and a holographic display appeared showing reports from across the Empire in the 6 weeks since your arrival. We have seen a 15% increase in unauthorized gatherings and a 20% decrease in compliance with traditional protocols and a 30% increase in what we call questioning behaviors. Those do not sound like terrible things. They are not terrible things, but they are destabilizing things, and an empire that has existed for 10,000 years cannot change overnight without consequences. So you are sending us away because we are inconvenient. We are sending you away because we are not ready for what you represent. And what is that? A different way of being. Elena was quiet for a moment. Will you attack Earth? No. Why not? Because if your species can produce people like you, then conquering your world would only spread your influence further. And because frankly we have enough problems without adding a planet of humans to our responsibilities. Vel waved his hand, and a document appeared in the air. This is a treaty guaranteeing that the Valorian hegemony will not interfere with Earth or any human expansion for a period of 10,000 years. That is very generous. It is self-preservation. Can I ask one more question? Go ahead. What will happen to your empire after we leave? Vel was quiet for a long time. I do not know, he said finally. The questions your presence raised cannot be unasked, and the ideas you introduced cannot be forgotten. Change is coming whether we want it or not. Is that a bad thing? It is a thing, and sometimes that is all we can say about the future. 2 days later, the USS Mundane was cleared for departure. Ship had been repaired by Valorian engineers, who had also quietly added some upgrades that would make the journey home safer and faster. Elena stood on the boarding ramp and said goodbye to the people she had met during her strange visit. She hugged Tal the god, who had learned to play poker. She shook hands with the head chef, who had given her a recipe for the barbecue dish he had invented. She waved to the young Valorians who had gathered to see her off, still sharing memes on their devices, and she had one final conversation with Supreme Admiral Vex Kai, who had come to oversee their departure. Admiral, she said, thank you for not killing us. Thank you for not making it necessary. Can I give you some advice? If you wish. Change does not have to be violent, and empires do not have to fall. They can transform, and the people you rule do not have to be your enemies. They can be your partners. That is a very optimistic view. Optimism is kind of our thing. I noticed. Elena turned to board the ship but stopped. One more thing, Admiral. Yes. Call your formation mates and tell them you miss them because life is too short to let pride get in the way of connection, even if your life is very long. Vex Kai did not respond, but something in his crystalline form shifted to a warmer color. The Mundane lifted off and climbed through the atmosphere and jumped to FDL with a much smoother transition than their original disastrous attempt. 3 days later, they emerged in their own solar system within sight of Mars. "We are home," Donnell said, and his voice cracked a little. "We are home." Elena confirmed. They limped back to Earth where they were, greeted by confused officials who had thought they were dead, and journalists who wanted to know everything, and scientists who wanted to study their modified ship. Elena gave exactly one interview in which she described their adventure as mostly uneventful, and definitely not the kind of thing that would destabilize a galactic empire. She went home to her apartment, where her cat was very annoyed at having been left alone for so long, and her daughters hugged her so tight she thought she might break, and she filed the whole trip as a tax-deductible business expense because she had technically been working in the decades that followed humanity learned to navigate the stars, and they encountered other species and built alliances, and eventually they heard news from the hegemony. The empire had not fallen, but it had changed. The Council of Ascendant Minds had been reformed into a more representative body. The conquered worlds had gained more autonomy and eventually something like citizenship. The tradition of fearful obedience had slowly given way to something that looked almost like cooperation. It took 100 years, but the hegemony transformed from an empire of conquest into something like a federation of equals. And when historians tried to trace the origin of this transformation, they kept coming back to a single event. A cargo ship called the Mundane had accidentally wandered into hegemony space, and its crew had treated the most powerful beings in the galaxy like they were just people. It was not a revolution in the traditional sense. There were no battles, no martyrs, no great speeches that rallied armies. There was just a tired captain drinking tea and asking about laundry, and sometimes that is enough. Sometimes the greatest changes come not from those who seek power, but from those who simply refuse to be afraid. Elena Vasquez died at 94 years old, surrounded by her family and her very old cather. Last words were reported to be something about hoping the afterlife had decent tea, but her legacy lived on in the stars, in an empire that learned to change in species, that learned to stand up straight, and in the simple radical idea that fear is a choice, and choosing not to be afraid can change everything. The end.